If you open the New York Times or turn on CNN right now, they will tell you the U.S. Navy is currently deployed to protect freedom of navigation. They show you footage of destroyers intercepting drones in the Red Sea, aircraft carriers parked off the coast of the Levant, and admirals talking about the sanctity of international law. They paint a picture of a benevolent global policeman ensuring that your Amazon packages and your Toyota spare parts get from point A to point B without being hijacked by pirates or blown up by insurgents. That is the spectacle. That is the theater designed to keep the public calm while the real game is played in the dark. Turn off the news. Look at the shipping manifests. Look at the maritime insurance premiums coming out of Lloyd's of London. What is actually happening on the high seas right now is not a protection mission, it is a demolition job. The United States is not simply securing global trade routes, it is actively, surgically dismantling the era of globalization it built 80 years ago. For decades, the deal was simple. The U.S. Navy guarantees the safety of every ship from every nation anywhere in the world for free. It didn't matter if you were an ally or a rival. The oceans were flat, safe, and open. That deal is over. We are witnessing the greatest reallocation of energy assets since the 1970s. But this time, it's not being decided by OPEC quotas or production caps. It is being decided by who is allowed to sail and who is forced to sink. The U.S. is no longer the guarantor of the global commons. It is becoming the gatekeeper of a gated community. The Red Sea crisis, the tensions in the South China Sea, the shadow war in the Baltic, these aren't accidents. They are the birth pangs of a new, bifurcated map where energy flows are determined not by the free market, but by naval capability. The mainstream narrative says we are trying to stop a war. The balance sheet tells a different story. We are weaponizing the chaos to redraw the flow of oil, locking allies into a dependency loop and forcing rivals into a logistical nightmare that bleeds their treasury dry. Capital doesn't care about freedom of the seas. Capital cares about risk premiums. And right now, the U.S. Navy is the only entity on Earth that can set the price of risk. To understand why this shift is catastrophic for the old world order, you have to look at the numbers that nobody talks about. Let's go back to the architecture of the post-World War II era. The Bretton Woods Agreement wasn't just about gold and the dollar. It was a security bribe. The United States told Europe and Japan, "We will patrol the oceans. We will keep the Strait of Hormuz open. You don't need to build navies to escort your oil tankers. We will do it for you. In exchange, you let us write the rules of the global economy, and you buy our debt." It worked. For 70 years, global trade volumes exploded because the cost of security was effectively zero for the merchant. But look at the data today. In 1990, the United States was the world's largest net importer of oil. We were addicted to the Middle East. Ensuring the flow of crude out of the Persian Gulf was a matter of national survival. Today, the shale revolution has inverted the board. The U.S. is now the world's largest oil producer, pumping out over 13 million barrels a day. We are a net energy exporter. Do the math. Why should the American taxpayer spend billions of dollars annually maintaining carrier strike groups to protect oil tankers leaving Saudi Arabia and heading to China? China is the world's largest importer of crude. They import over 11 million barrels a day. Roughly 50% of that comes from the Middle East. Every single day, Chinese energy security relies on a maritime highway policed by the very Navy they claim is their enemy. It is a strategic absurdity. And the markets have noticed this anomaly. Look at the divergence in shipping costs. The cost to ship a container from Shanghai to Rotterdam has fluctuated violently, spiking by 200% or more during peak tension moments in the Red Sea. Meanwhile, transatlantic routes remain relatively stable. Why? Because the market knows that the U.S. Navy has a vested interest in the Atlantic, but has zero incentive to prioritize the safety of goods flowing from Asia to Europe if it hurts their strategic competitors. We are also seeing a historical decoupling of the world island. For centuries, the dream of the Eurasian powers, Russia, China, Iran, was to integrate their economies. They wanted pipelines and rail belts. But oil is heavy. It is liquid. It is infinitely cheaper to move by water than by land. A very large crude carrier, VLCC, can hold 2 million barrels of oil. To move that same amount by pipeline requires massive infrastructure that can be blown up by a single drone. To move it by rail is economically suicidal. So, the world is still addicted to the oceans. About 60% of all oil traded globally moves by sea. And the choke points of this trade, the Suez Canal, the Strait of Bab el-Mandeb, the Strait of Hormuz, the Strait of Malacca, are narrower than you think. At its narrowest point, the shipping lane in the Strait of Hormuz is only 2 miles wide. 2 miles. That is the jugular vein of the global economy. Historically, the U.S. Navy kept that vein open. Now, we are seeing a shift towards selective engagement. When the Houthis fire missiles in the Red Sea, notice who gets hit and who doesn't. Notice which flags the U.S. Navy chooses to escort and which ones are left to negotiate their own passage. We are returning to the pre-1945 world, a world where the flag on your ship determined your insurance rate, your route, and your survival. The data confirms the split. Trade between friendly nations, what the bureaucrats call friendshoring, is hitting record highs. Meanwhile, the efficiency of global shipping is plummeting. Routes are getting longer. Ships are bypassing the Suez Canal to go around the Cape of Good Hope, adding 10 to 14 days to the journey and burning millions more in fuel. This isn't just an inconvenience. It represents a structural deletion of global shipping capacity. If a ship takes 30% longer to complete a voyage, you effectively delete 30% of the global fleet's capacity overnight. Supply shrinks, prices rise, and who captures the margin? The nations with the naval power to secure the shortcuts. Let's strip away the geopolitics for a moment and look at the mechanics, because this is where the money is actually made and lost. The mechanism of control here isn't just Tomahawk missiles, it's the invisible hand of maritime insurance and the physics of crude refining. First, understand that the oil market is not a monolith. Not all oil is created equal. You have sweet crude, which is low in sulfur and easy to refine into gasoline. This is what comes out of the Permian Basin in Texas. Then you have sour crude, heavy with sulfur, which requires massive, complex refineries to process. This is what comes out of the Middle East, Venezuela, and Russia. Here is the mechanical reality. The U.S. refining system is actually built to process heavy, sour crude. We sell our high-quality light sweet crude to Europe and Asia, and we import the heavy stuff to run through our complex refineries in the Gulf Coast. It's a global swap meet. But this swap meet relies on the Protection and Indemnity, P&I, clubs. These are the insurers, mostly based in the UK and Europe, who underwrite 90% of the world's ocean-going tonnage. Without P&I insurance, a ship cannot legally enter most major ports. It cannot dock. It cannot unload. It is a pariah. When the U.S. Navy signals that a region is unsafe, or when the U.S. Treasury designates a fleet as high risk due to sanctions, the Western insurance markets instantly recoil. They pull coverage. This is the kill switch. You don't need to sink a tanker to stop it. You just need to make it uninsurable. So how does naval power redraw the route? By manipulating the war risk premium. When a tanker enters a designated high-risk zone, say the Red Sea right now, the insurance premium can jump from 0.02% of the hull value to 0.7% or even 1% per voyage. On a vessel worth $100 million carrying $150 million in cargo, that is a massive cost increase. It destroys the profit margin of the trade. The U.S. Navy creates a safety bubble for allied shipping. If you are part of the alliance structure, you get the convoy. You get the intelligence. Your insurance rates stay manageable. If you are outside the bubble, say a Chinese-operated vessel carrying Iranian oil, you are on your own. You face the pirates, the drones, and the prohibitive insurance costs. This forces the rival powers to physically change their routes. Instead of taking the direct route through the Suez, they are forced to take the long way around Africa or attempt dangerous ship-to-ship transfers in the middle of the ocean to hide the origin of the oil. Furthermore, consider the physical choke points. The Strait of Malacca connects the Indian Ocean to the Pacific. It is the lifeline of the Asian economies. The U.S. Navy doesn't need to blockade it to control it. They simply need to exist nearby. By maintaining dominance in the first island chain, the U.S. holds a knife to the throat of Chinese energy imports. This mechanical reality forces a behavior change. China is frantically building overland pipelines through Pakistan and Central Asia to bypass the water. They are desperate to reduce the Malacca dilemma. But pipelines are rigid. They are fixed assets. A ship can change course. A pipeline cannot. If a conflict breaks out in Central Asia, that investment is zero. The naval strategy is essentially a tax on the competitor's logistics. By degrading the security of the global commons, the U.S. forces its rivals to spend billions on their own naval escorts, their own insurance schemes, and inefficient overland routes. It is a strategy of cost imposition. We are forcing them to pay for what they used to get for free. Think of it like a toll road. For decades, the highway was public. Now, the U.S. has put up a toll booth. If you have the right pass, alliance, you drive through. If you don't, you have to take the dirt road through the mountains. And the dirt road is where the tires blow out. This reshapes the refining map too. If Middle Eastern oil becomes too expensive or risky to ship to the U.S. Gulf Coast, American refiners will retool to process more domestic shale. This isolates the North American energy market, making it an island of stability while the rest of the world deals with the volatility of the dirt road trade routes. The mechanics of insurance and physics are segregating the global economy into two distinct spheres, the secured zone and the chaotic zone. Here is the irony. Here is the part of the story that the Pentagon strategists won't say out loud, but the commodities traders are screaming about. By weaponizing the sea lanes and the insurance markets, the United States has inadvertently created a monster it cannot control. We intended to squeeze our rivals, Russia, Iran, China, into submission. We thought that by cutting them off from Western insurance and U.S. Navy protection, their economies would crumble. Instead, we forced them to build a parallel system that is now immune to our leverage. Welcome to the rise of the shadow fleet. This is the twist. Because Russia and Iran could no longer use Western ships and Western insurance, they went out and bought hundreds of old, rusting tankers destined for the scrapyard. They created a ghost armada, vessels with obscure ownership structures, registered in jurisdictions with lax oversight like Gabon or Panama, insured by opaque state-backed entities in Moscow or Tehran. This fleet now moves millions of barrels of oil every single day, completely outside the Western financial and legal system. They turn off their transponders, they spoof their GPS locations, they conduct ship-to-ship transfers in the middle of the Atlantic to blend sanctioned oil with legal oil. The U.S. Navy was built to fight state navies. It was built to hunt submarines and shoot down aircraft. It was not built to police thousands of rust bucket tankers that don't care about international law. We cannot sink them all. That would cause an environmental catastrophe and a global war. We cannot board them all. We don't have enough ships. So, the result of our pressure campaign is that we have lost visibility. Before, when these countries used Western insurance, we knew exactly how much oil was moving and where it was going. Now, it's a black hole. We have pushed the trade into the dark, where our sanctions have zero bite. And it gets worse. By making the dollar and Western insurance a weapon, we have accelerated the de-dollarization of the energy trade. For 50 years, the petrodollar reigned supreme because you needed dollars to buy oil. But now, if you are India buying Russian oil or China buying Iranian oil, you are specifically avoiding the dollar to avoid the sanctions risk. You pay in yuan, in rupees, or in gold. The twist is that U.S. naval dominance intended to secure the global order is actively fracturing it. We are creating a self-fulfilling prophecy. We feared a rival bloc would emerge, so we tightened the screws, which forced that rival bloc to actually emerge. Look at the BRICS alliance. It is no longer just a talk shop. It is becoming a mutual insurance union. They are discussing creating their own maritime insurance clearinghouses so they never have to rely on London or New York again. If that happens, the West loses one of its most potent non-military weapons. Furthermore, this strategy has exposed the limitations of the U.S. Navy itself. We are seeing imperial overstretch in real time. We have carriers in the Red Sea firing $2 million missiles to shoot down $20,000 drones. The cost exchange ratio is upside down. The Houthi rebels, with zero navy, have managed to disrupt global trade more effectively than some major powers simply by exploiting the choke points. The U.S. Navy is finding that while it can win any high-end naval battle, it cannot secure every inch of the sea against asymmetric threats. By trying to redraw the map, we have spread our forces too thin. We are playing whack-a-mole on a global scale. This backfire creates a dangerous feedback loop. As the shadow fleet grows, the risk of accidents rises. These ships are old, they are poorly maintained. When one of them inevitably breaks apart and spills millions of gallons of crude, there is no Western insurer to pay for the cleanup. Who pays? The coastal nations, the environment. The paradox is stark. In our attempt to secure the seas for freedom, we have filled the oceans with lawless, uninsurable ghost ships that answer to no one. We tried to isolate our enemies, but instead, we isolated ourselves from the reality of the market. The global oil trade hasn't stopped. It has just gone underground, or rather underwater, where we can no longer tax it, regulate it, or control it. So why should you, sitting in your living room in Ohio or Manchester or Munich, care about a ghost tanker floating off the coast of Malaysia? Why does it matter if the U.S. Navy stops patrolling the Red Sea? Because you have lived your entire life inside a subsidy you didn't know existed. Everything you own, the phone in your hand, the clothes on your back, the fuel in your car, the fertilizer that grew your food, was priced based on a world where shipping was cheap, safe, and guaranteed by Uncle Sam. That subsidy is evaporating. When trade routes bifurcate, efficiency dies. When efficiency dies, inflation lives. You are confused why inflation seems sticky, why, despite interest rate hikes, the cost of goods won't go back to 2019 levels? This is why. The global supply chain is being rerouted from the most efficient path to the most secure path. Security costs money, resilience costs money. If a tanker has to sail 4,000 extra miles to avoid a conflict zone, the price of that oil goes up. But it's not just the oil. It's the diesel that trucks use to deliver food to your supermarket. It's the jet fuel for your vacation. It's the feedstock for plastics. When the cost of energy logistics rises, the cost of everything rises. We are entering an era of structural inflation. This isn't the temporary inflation caused by printing too much money. This is inflation caused by the friction of a broken world. And here is the darker reality for the Western consumer: the freedom premium. As the world splits into two, the US-led bloc and the BRICS shadow bloc, we are going to see price divergence. The countries in the shadow bloc might actually end up with cheaper energy than you. China and India are currently buying Russian and Iranian oil at a massive discount because Western sanctions have removed the competition. They are powering their factories with cheap, sanctioned energy. Meanwhile, you, in the West, are paying full market price for ethically sourced, secure energy. This puts Western manufacturing at a massive disadvantage. If a factory in Guangdong pays half as much for electricity as a factory in Germany, guess where the jobs stay? This naval redrawing of trade routes is effectively a tax on the Western middle class. You are paying for the aircraft carriers. You are paying for the longer shipping routes. You are paying the higher insurance premiums passed down into the price of your sneakers. And what happens to your retirement account? The S&P 500 is heavily weighted toward companies that rely on globalized supply chains. Apple, Tesla, Nike, these companies need the oceans to be open and boring. If the oceans become contested territory, if the just-in-time delivery model collapses because ships are getting delayed by weeks, the profit margins of these giants compress. Your 401k is bet on a world that no longer exists. The days of cheap goods are over because the days of cheap security are over. The ocean is no longer a free highway. It's a toll road, and the toll is rising every single day. The doom factor here isn't a sudden crash. It's a slow, grinding erosion of your purchasing power as the friction of global conflict eats away at the efficiency of your life. You aren't just watching a geopolitical chess game, you are the pawn paying for the board. We are witnessing the funeral of the ocean as a global commons. For most of human history, the sea was a place of danger, chaos, and piracy. It was a wild frontier. For a brief, shining moment, roughly from 1945 to 2020, we tamed it. We convinced ourselves that commerce had conquered conquest. We believed that because trade was mutually beneficial, war was obsolete. We were wrong. The ocean has returned to its natural state, a contested battle space. The U.S. naval strategy we've discussed today, the weaponization of insurance, the selective protection of lanes, the forcing of rivals into shadow fleets, confirms that the era of globalization is dead. It has been replaced by the era of mercantilism. In a mercantilist world, trade is not a cooperative game. It is a zero-sum weapon. My gain is your loss. My secure shipping lane is your blockade. What comes next in the next 6 to 12 months? Watch the insurance brokers, watch the Lloyds of London lists. We are likely to see the first major accidental catastrophe involving the Shadow Fleet, a spill or a collision that will be used as a pretext to attempt a blockade of the dark trade. This will be the flashpoint. When the West tries to police the Ghost Armada, the East will respond not with sanctions, but with escorts. We are moving toward a world of gated oceans. There will be the American Ocean, the Chinese Ocean, and the lawless Badlands in between. If you are a corporation, a nation, or an investor, you have to choose which gate you want to live behind. But know this, once the gates close, nothing crosses the threshold without paying the master's tax. The maps on your wall are outdated. They show borders on land, but they show the ocean as one continuous blue expanse. That blue is an illusion. The water is being carved up just like the land, and in this new world, he who rules the waves doesn't just rule the world, he decides who gets to eat and who starves. The tide is turning, and it is leaving the old world high and dry.